modern view is like the Hobbesian view in some sense, except you want to replace the individual with pyramids of social organization, so hierarchies of social organization that are based on group identity, and that the landscape in which those pyramids exist is one of unbroken enmity and inability to communicate. So it's a very dark view as far as I'm concerned. And I think it's fundamentally wrong in many ways. I mean, it's right in that there are groups of people and there is some difficulty in communication between them, and that power is an element in the formation of hierarchies, but you can't reduce hierarchy or group relationship to those premises. It's too simplified because people also cooperate. We're also not groups. Many of us belong to many groups. So it's the actual situation is far too complex to reduce it to that degree, even though you can come up with a good explanatory story if you do so. It doesn't capture the nuances, and they're not just nuances. It doesn't capture the essence. Now, the thing is that when you make the presupposition that the reason that hierarchies exist is because of power, then essentially what you do is turn every hierarchy into a tyranny. And so if there is a hierarchy, then you assume it's a tyranny. Well, that's really the patriarchy. The patriarchy is hierarchy assumed as tyranny. And that's also just not true, except in pathological hierarchies. So, for example, we know from the psychological literature that the best predictors of long-term life success are intelligence and conscientiousness, in Western countries at least. And, well, that's what you'd hope for, right? You'd more or less, if you wanted even to set up a society, even if you weren't particularly smart or hardworking, you might want to set up a society where intelligence and hard work were good predictors of success, because then the people who were smart and hardworking would produce a bunch of things that you could have if you could trade for them. And of course, that is actually the situation that most of us are in. So, and of course, the other thing about people who believe that hierarchies in the West are only composed of power and tyranny is that their own actions belie that, because whenever they make a decision to interact with that hierarchy, they attempt or to make a purchase or to make a trade, let's say, or to obtain a service of any importance, let's say a medical service, they're going to definitely act as if there are less and more competent people within that hierarchy and seek out the ones that are more competent, obviously, which you don't do. If the hierarchy is only composed of tyranny and power, there's no point in looking for competence. But anyways, in the West and in functioning societies, the hierarchies are basically predicated on competence and not power. And you might say, well, that's pretty naive. It's like, no, actually, it's not very naive. I'm not saying at all that inappropriate power plays don't play a role in corrupting hierarchies of competence. That happens, but generally what happens is if the hierarchies of competence get corrupted enough by power, then they crumble because they can no longer function. So, and the evidence that our hierarchies of competence work is everywhere, because everything around us works all the time. Ayaan Hirsi Ali tells two interesting stories in her book Infidel, which is a great book, by the way. She came from Africa and from a country that wasn't very functional. And when she came to Holland, she said there were two things that really amazed her. And this really struck me because, now and then you get lucky and you can see the world you live in from an outsider's perspective, right? You get to see through someone else's eyes. She said the first thing that knocked her off her feet was waiting for a bus in Amsterdam. And she's standing at the bus stop and there's a pole there and there's a digital sign on the pole, and the digital sign says when the next bus is going to come and counts down, and then when it hits 0, the bus appears. And she absolutely could not believe that would happen, that there could be a sign that told you when the bus would come and that it would change and the bus would actually appear. And you think, well, yeah, no, that's a miracle, man. That's an absolute miracle. It is. You got to think that through. The amount of timing and organization and reliability, mechanical reliability and sociological or social organization and dedication on the part of the bus drivers and the entire company and the organization of the whole city and the state to make that possible is absolutely beyond belief, especially when it's timed to, well, perhaps not the second, but to 10 seconds or something like that. That is absolutely beyond belief. And her inability to comprehend that was the correct response. And then the other thing she was amazed by was that you could go talk to policemen and they would help you. That was just a no-go for her, because for her experience was policemen were there to shake you down and hurt you. And so you think, well, you know, well, I won't dwell on that point any longer. The point is that it's absolutely ridiculous, blind, to make the assumption that the hierarchies in functioning Western democracies are fundamentally predicated on power and tyranny.